All right. Welcome, beautiful souls, to another fabulous episode of the Faith Fitness Joy podcast. I am your health coach and host, Rochelle Renee. And today I am talking about setting boundaries. It is so critical to be able to set boundaries. And when you are starting and working to stay on some sort of a health and wellness journey. And yet it can be really difficult for so many of us to do. And this lack of boundaries is actually one of the biggest reasons that people struggle to get started with fitness and nutrition and really stick with it. And I know in my own experience and a lot of women that I've worked with and talked to and that are, working on starting their own health and wellness journey, we struggle with this idea that it's selfish to do this for yourself. It's selfish to somehow prioritize your health and well-being. And a lot of women really struggle with guilt around it, among many other things. So we sort of tell ourselves that we don't have time and that we have to work late. We have to be at so-and-so's event and we have to be here and we have to be there. And it's like literally everything and everyone else is at the top of the list or before us on our list of priorities and to-dos. And this can be tough to hear, but none of it is true. None of it is necessary. It's not a requirement. It's not you're not really obligated to do all of these things. You have a choice. It's just that we often don't feel like we do. And many of us don't know how to prioritize or put our boundaries up, and say, enough's enough, or I only have X amount of time every week for A, B, and C. And so, anything outside of that, I'm going to have to start making some decisions about what's got to go. But again, it's something that no one really helps us figure out how to do, or that we aren't really sure how to go about doing it, because again, we often struggle with these feelings of guilt or shame or something else. We're letting somebody down. And also, a lot of this comes from sort of this conditioning that as a society, we're all sort of raised with around this idea of, we have to hustle and we have to be, maximize every minute of every hour of every day. And there's not enough hours in the day, and you can't, have a certain type of life, or you can't make a certain income unless you just work nonstop and you're doing and going and doing all day long every day. However, it just simply is not true. We don't really have to do any of these things. We just convince ourselves that we do, or we buy into this belief, this conditioning that we've been raised with, that that's how it has to be. So how do you shift this? How do we get ourselves out of this sort of cycle of hustle and burnout that's caused by not just this lack of boundaries, but also this really kind of this false conditioning that many of us have been raised with, whether it's implied or very, explicitly, told to us. How do you kind of break out of that? What can we do? How can you set boundaries for yourself? So today we're going to talk about one, evaluating where you are. Number two, determining how you want things to change. Three, deciding, making a decision. Four, committing. And five, identifying and releasing all of the different limiting beliefs or stories or things that come up in your mind that tell you that you are, you can't do this, or you can't set these boundaries. You can't step away from this obligation or that obligation. So many of you may recall, and some of you may not, that there was this movie about 20-ish years ago or so, and it was called Office Space. And there was a character in that movie whose name was Peter Gibbons. And he was like my spirit animal at one point in my career. And one of the things that he says in this movie is that human beings were not meant to sit in little cubicles staring at computer screens all day, listening to 8 different bosses drone on about TPS reports. And it was that just always I just always thought that scene is so funny, but it resonated so much with me at the time because the majority of my career, that was how it was. And this was around the time when this movie first came out. I had been working full time in an office setting for probably about 4 or 5 years at the time that this movie came out, or at least the time I had seen the movie. And I remember being in this kind of position where I was just sort of faced with this question, like, is this really it? I just really hated the idea that most of my life was going to be spent at work in this little cubicle. And when I started adding up the amount of time, when you think about how much time we sleep and the amount of time that we're required to be at our job, physically at this job, it started to become really apparent how little bit of this life that we actually get when we are, following sort of this concept, this conditioning. And I get that it's very, kind of like normal. It's what a lot of us do. And obviously I learned that I had to kind of accept this and continue moving on in my life. And, so then I kind of shifted my focus over time to finding jobs that I enjoyed more, that I found fulfilling in some way, and really looked for things, places that I could work that, had this mission that I could get behind. So, for a long time in my career, I had that. At the same time, one of the things that comes with being in jobs and working environments is you don't have a lot of control over the people you work with or the environment that you're working in, maybe even your boss and things like that. And so, inevitably things will shift and change. And I found myself in many different toxic environments over the years, whether it was the people I was working with or the culture in the particular part of the organization I was working in or the organization itself. And so it really it just kind of amplified some of these feelings, I guess you could say. And so that sort of feeling just kind of would get louder and louder, especially when I found myself in these situations with, either toxic bosses or toxic coworkers or both. I had that pleasure as well, where it was like kind of coming at me at all angles. Um, and again, that question came back, like, is this really it? Like, is this how, like, am I going to have to spend another 20 years like this? Um, and even though I identified with and really kind of felt exactly like Peter Gibbons from this movie, for a large part of my work life, I've always really been very hardworking. If you've seen the movie, like he has that one of the sort of running jokes in the movie is that he has this dream of doing nothing because he doesn't really know what he would really want to do. And he just is so miserable in his job that every time someone asks him, he says, that he would just do nothing. And I don't think I was quite to that extreme necessarily, but I remember wanting to be able to have more flexibility or wanting to be able to have more of my time. But like I said, at the same time, I've always been a very hardworking person. I was raised, my dad had a construction business for over 30 years. So I grew up seeing, him working literally every day of the week. He was working all the time. He would be coming home late. And so it was just something I kind of grew up witnessing and I guess sort of adopted. And both of my parents, it was always like work hard and do a good job and work hard and you can get far and all this stuff, right? So I've always had a strong work ethic. I've always been very hardworking. And I got to a point in my career, especially when I was younger, before I had my kids, where it was like darn near working myself to death, really, pretty closely. And then especially like even after I had my kids, like still kind of continuing with this obsession. And I started to really kind of struggle with various health issues related to it, whether it was physical health issues or just issues with anxiety and panic disorder and depression, because I was burned out. I was burning myself out. I was burning the candle at both ends. And again, it was all for these jobs, for my job. And I did this for decades. And sometimes I would work well into the night. I'd be getting home late. I just felt spread really thin. And when I wasn't at work, my mind was on work constantly. I was just like this obsession. Like I said, I was worried about something I hadn't gotten done or something that was going on that I was trying to figure out how to solve the problem or how to, fix the issue or whatever it was. And I was at work 24/7 because it was either in my mind and stressing about it and thinking about it that way, or physically being there and then being stressed and all that while I was there. So I was just kind of in this all the time and very driven, like I said, very ambitious. And so I was promoting pretty consistently every 1 to 2 years. There was one period where I was in a certain position for maybe about 5 years, but generally, other than that, I was always moving up into a different role. Um, increasing responsibility every couple of years. And part of that was because I've always had this drive to continue to better myself in some way. It just was always focused in my job for much of my life. What can I do next? How can I get to the next level? How can I get better? How can I do better? And I found myself in this situation where someone else in my organization had kind of set their sights on my role, and basically kind of decided that this was something they should be doing, and I was kind of in the way. And basically, it started to turn into a very toxic work environment. This person was, engaging in this manipulative behavior, and um, just a very undermining kind of a situation. And it was one of those things where there was no really, there was not, if you tried to say anything about it, it would just kind of backfire. You would look like the bad guy or whatever. So it was just awful. And that went on for, gosh, probably about 3 years or so. And at the same time, I had, had my youngest about a year prior to that. And I was trying to kind of, regain my sense of self after that, and trying to lose the weight from having my youngest, and all of these kinds of things were kind of like, what's the word? Kind of compounding on each other. And so the stress, the toxic environment, with the coworker and some of the leadership I was working with, and all this kind of stuff going on, trying to balance, being a mom, this long commute that I had. I just felt so spread thin, and the depression was getting worse, the panic attacks were getting worse, and my health wasn't great. And I was just feeling worse and worse and worse. And so it got to a point where I was like, what am I doing this for? Like I said, I was in this situation where it felt like I was damned if I did, and I was damned if I didn't. And in hindsight, I'm very thankful for that situation, because it was like the breaking point for me. It was the thing that finally gave me I don't know what you call it, just like um, the push, or the sheer like determination to be like, screw this. I am not going to continue to allow my health and my well-being to deteriorate for this job where I'm not even appreciated, and being in this toxic environment all day every day. I'm going to start, taking care of myself. I'm going to get my health back. Like, so that was kind of the breaking point, the turning point for me. And that was the point that I started to really take a serious look at, like, okay, I need some boundaries here. I need, like, if I'm going to um, lose this weight, if I'm going to improve my mental well-being, if I'm going to really regain my sense of self and my confidence and all of those things, then I need to put my health first. I need to be at the top of my priority list, which was very counterintuitive for me, because like I said earlier, a lot of women, especially mothers, we feel like that's a selfish thing to do. We feel like it's the wrong way to go about it. Like, we should be at the bottom of the list. But the thing is, you cannot take care of everybody that needs you if you are falling apart or unraveling yourself, right? So you have to put yourself at the top of the priority list, and everything else will fall in place as your well-being gets better. So how did I go from being way too obsessed with my job and obligations to putting my boundaries up? How did I get past this idea that it was somehow selfish to have the audacity to want to be healthy and have my own sense of well-being back, right? And like I said, this situation that I just shared definitely helped me, and it was the push that I needed to do that. And in reflecting on all of that, there was like this process that I went through to get to where I was setting these boundaries and really like holding firm with them. And so this is the process that, sort of like looking back, I was following. The first thing is evaluating where you are, right? So take some time and look around at your life. Is this truly what you want for yourself? How are you feeling? Do you feel, like I did, where it's like this disconnection from yourself, and you kind of have this like, where did I go in all of of these things, right? Like, you kind of, I just remember this time where I felt like I'd sort of lost my sense of self and my kind of identity. um and then, looking at all of the aspects of your life, and is it the way that you would want it? If you had a magic wand, what would it look like? If you could have a magic wand and make your outer reality, your whole life, like exactly how you want it, would it be the way it is right now? I'd venture to say probably not. And there's nothing wrong with that because we all have things we probably desire and can strive for, right? So, but taking a look at those things and being honest with yourself about that, um, and are you who you want to be? Do you feel how you want to feel? Is your body where you want it to be? Is your physical well-being where you want it to be? Really sitting down and asking yourselves these questions. What about your energy? Do you feel like you have enough energy? Do you feel like you're running on empty? Are you dragging through the day most of the time? It's really important to be really honest with yourself in this stage, because you can't improve unless you do that. Um, and I can tell you that you can improve, you can find a way, you can set the boundaries, and you can regain your health and your confidence and all of these things. It's just, again, it's a matter of prioritizing yourself and choosing yourself in order so you can be better for everybody that you love and that relies on you. So that's the first thing, is to really be honest with all of those, that whole process. The second thing is to determine how you want things to change. So now that you've taken some time to evaluate where you are, it's time to determine what you want. So using the things that you identified in the first step as like what you don't like and what you're not happy with, what you want to change. In my case, it started with my weight. Like I thought that was the silver bullet to everything. If I lost the baby weight, then everything else would magically be better. But really what I wanted was to feel confident in my skin again. I wanted to have more energy. I wanted to not feel tired and drained all the time. I wanted um, to just feel like myself again. I wanted to reconnect with that part of myself. So pursuing this ultimately led me to other things, like learning to love myself and learning to be honest about where I was and how some of these things had come about. And in the years since this all started, I've that led me into my inner healing work that I talk about a lot on here as well, which helped me uncover a lot of the trauma that was underneath all of these things that were making me burn myself out, like people pleasing and hyper independence and alexithymia and adrenal burnout and all of these things that are born of something else that's maybe not you're not aware of, or that's based in some past trauma or some past hurt that has become your MO, because you're trying to fix this thing that maybe is not complete with you. So for me, that's how it led me into the inner healing work and all of that stuff. And that's how I started to kind of unravel this onion, because it happens in layers. You do this over time, and you uncover certain layers, you process them, you give yourself the time to really like sit with it and heal and move forward and grow again, and then you move forward, and it happens all over again whenever you start to kind of move into something different. So that's a little bit about how the process goes, and kind of that next step of uh, really like determining how you want things to change, after you've looked at like where you're starting from. And then the third thing is to make the decision. You have to make the decision for yourself. You have to decide that you matter enough, that you're important enough, that your well-being and your health are important enough for you to put these boundaries up, and that it's not selfish. And I'm telling you, it's not selfish. It's quite the contrary. It's the exact opposite of that. So now that you've made the decision, or now that yeah, I want to change my life. I want to change my health. I want to feel better. Maybe you started to identify some goals for yourself as a result of these other two steps that we've just talked about. Now it's time to decide that you're going to accomplish these goals. You're going to put yourself first, no matter what. You are going to make sure you have the time every day to exercise. You're going to make sure that you, have everything in your house that you need to stay on track with better nutrition. You're going to make time every evening to spend some time on self-improvement or meditating or some other form of stress management, or whatever it is that's related to what you want to change. And then the next step is to make the commitment. It's not enough to just make the decision. You also have to make the commitment that you're going to do this for yourself. And ultimately here, what's really important is you're making the commitment to yourself more than anybody else. And this is no different than any other commitment that we make in life. We treat it differently. I know I did for a long time. It took me a bit to kind of get to where I was really like committing to myself, because we tend to be more inclined to break these commitments to ourselves. So it could be helpful to tell somebody else, maybe your partner, maybe a close friend, a sibling, whatever it is. Tell someone else that you trust that will support you. Like, hey, I'm going to be doing this. I'm making this commitment to myself. It would really help me if you support me in this, and even help hold me accountable to this. So that's an important step as well, because we are conditioned to believe that it's somehow selfish to prioritize ourselves. And um, it's really actually about the least selfish thing that you can do. But again, we're sort of, I don't know where exactly it comes from. We get this idea in our head that it is. But if you think about it, when you are at your best, when you feel your best, when you have your confidence, when you feel like your cup is filled, you are going to be kinder, you're going to be more effective, you're going to be happier, and you're going to be just a better overall version of yourself and person to other people around you. And that is going to have a ripple effect everywhere you go. So commit to doing this, commit to putting yourself first, eating healthy, exercising, getting enough sleep, spending time with those you love. This is all stuff that, like, I used to act like it was some kind of option. And it, like, looking back on it, it's crazy. Like, where do we get the idea that it somehow you're a loser if you require a minimum amount of sleep to function properly the next day, or that you need to take a 30-minute break for yourself during the day to eat some food and maybe get some fresh air away from your desk or whatever it is. But like, I mean, I was in these cultures where that was like, that was the attitude. It was like you were some kind of loser if you did these things. And it's just, it's mind blowing looking back on it now. But like I said, I lived like this for decades. Um, so again, it's like you have to make the commitment, and you have to be strong enough in that commitment that you're not going to let that exterior like attitude of other people or environment, because by the way, a lot of it is perceived. It may not necessarily be the case. But you have to like really like just, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna tune that out. I don't care, like get over what people think, forget what people think. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, like, are they going to be by your bedside if God forbid you end up having some sort of a chronic illness because you were working yourself too hard and were stressed out for too long and your body finally shuts down on you? Probably not. I'm pretty sure none of those people that you're killing yourself for at work or wherever it is are going to be there. So you have to kind of put that in perspective in order to kind of move past this stage, because I found this stage in particular was one of the harder ones to move through, because again, I also had to work through the concern about what other people were going to think of me. And then last is identify and release the limiting beliefs that come up. So this is kind of related to the number 4, right? Like, as you start doing this, and I've talked about this in other episodes, the way that our mind will resist us making these kinds of changes. Our subconscious mind is very like, it's very powerful, and it's doing its job. As crazy as it sounds, but the job of the ego or the subconscious mind is to keep us safe. And safety, as far as the subconscious goes, means things staying the same. No change, nothing's different. You keep in the same patterns and you follow the same everything day in and day out, because that's predictable, that's known. Your body knows how to handle that, your subconscious mind knows how to handle it, because that's the way you always operate. So whenever you do any kind of change, your brain and your subconscious are going to like rise up against you and throw all kinds of crap at you, like shame and guilt and fear and everything else, even things that are not necessarily emotions. It can be physical things, it can be more subconscious things, self-sabotaging things. So there's so many different ways that our minds will do this. So and part of that is this concept of limiting beliefs that we all hold and have, and these stories that we tell ourselves that keep us in these modes of operation. So if you have a story that, like some of the stories I had was that like you were not going to be respected in your job if you weren't working like 12 hours plus a day, or if you weren't available even when you were at home to respond to an email or answer a phone call. but that was just a story that I had in my mind. And as soon as I made the decision that no, I'm no longer available to take phone calls late in the evening when I'm home or respond to emails until 1 or 2 in the morning, um, to try to keep up with things or to have this appearance of whatever I thought I needed to have, right? So these are the kinds of things you want to pay attention to, so that you can start to shift them and you can start to identify them. And I talk about this process in depth in other podcast episodes that I've done about inner healing, alchemizing. That's really what it is. It's this what I call the 4 A's. So the first part of it is awareness, right? So becoming aware of the limiting belief or the story, the lie, aka the lie. So if you start to feel guilty, for example, for putting the boundaries up, you have to dig into that. Okay, why do I feel guilty about this? What story do I have around me being first on my priority list or taking care of my health and well-being, right? So you have to dig into that and figure out what is the story there, and then you can start to do. And well, actually, that's moving you into the second A, which is analysis, right? So starting to analyze that. Where did this come from? Where did this start? Why do I think this? Why do I have this belief? And then that takes you into alchemy, which is where you're going to start rewriting that story and changing that belief. And it starts with a simple question: is this ultimately true? Is this true that I am not hardworking if I don't answer emails from my job until the wee hours of the night? No, that's not true, right? So that's what you want to start to do, is bust up these stories and these lies, and then you want to start to rewrite them. What does feel better? I'm better at my job when I get enough sleep every night. I'm better for everybody that depends on me when I am at my best health and at my most rested and all of these things, right? So that's how you start to alchemize it and rewrite the stories, rewrite the limiting beliefs, and then you have to affirm it. And that's where the rubber meets the road, is really, the consistent practice of reaffirming these new stories and these new beliefs until you start to really embody them, and you start to feel that shift, and it starts to become more real. So that, my friends, is the process for how you can start to establish boundaries for yourself so that you can be a better version of you and live a life that you love. It can be very challenging at first, and throughout this whole process, as I mentioned, you may find different points that are more difficult for you. For me, like I said, it was really when I had to start to enforce the boundaries and work through these inner thoughts and limiting beliefs I was holding on to that were, trying to keep me from pushing forward. But I can promise you that it's one of the greatest gifts that you can give yourself, and you will thank yourself one day. If you can kind of work through the burn on these things and keep going until you're able to really get those boundaries established and really hold firm with them. So I hope you'll do this for yourselves. I hope you'll give this a try. I would love to hear from you in the comments. So, if you want to share things that come up for you as you're looking at your own limiting beliefs, what limiting beliefs come up for you, or what feelings come up for you when you think about putting yourself at the top of the list. Where do you think you're going to have the most work to do in terms of making this change for yourself? So would love to hear that in the comments. So please feel free to share those. That concludes today's episode of the Faith Fitness Joy podcast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to all of you who follow and subscribe to the show or my YouTube channel. And if you aren't already, please make sure you like and subscribe and share with others that you think would benefit from this podcast. And last but not least, if you find this podcast helpful and you would like to support my work, I would greatly appreciate contributions. So you can make those in the link in the comments or in the episode description. If you feel led to do that, that would be really helpful and greatly appreciated. And so with that, I will wish you all a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Faith Fitness Joy podcast. And I will see you all next week. You do not want to miss Monday's podcast episode. I am welcoming special guest from Real Recovery Talk podcast, Dr. Pamela Tambini, and we are going to be talking about a whole health approach to a substance use disorder, addiction, recovery treatment. So check that out on Monday, August 12th, and have a fabulous weekend in the meantime.